Everyone, thank you for joining us for today's webinar conducted by ISACA Sri Lanka Chapter. Before starting the program, I want to remind you that when you're registering, please make sure you enter your name, email address, and your membership number correctly, so then it's easy for us to upload the CPE points. You will be awarded 1 CPE point for this webinar. If you have any questions to be asked from the speaker, please type in the Q&A window. Today's topic is how do OT cyber risk impact critical infrastructure? Speaker here with us today is Stephen Simcock Leong, and the moderator is Niranjan Disanaika. Stephen is the head of Group Cybersecurity of MNC and the chair of OT-ISAC Executive Committee. He is the past president of the ISACA Singapore Chapter and the member of both ISACA Information Security Advisory Group and the Emerging Trends Working Group. Over to you, Stephen.
Thanks. Thanks. Really honored to be here. Good evening, everyone, and happy VSAC Day tomorrow for those of you who practices that who are Buddhists. In fact, in Singapore itself, today is VSAC Day. Yeah, we celebrate VSAC Day today. Yeah. So again, good evening to all fellow ISACA members. I've been ISACA member for close to 20 years. Yeah, I've been a platinum member for quite a long while, and I find that the Engage Forum, the members, the sharing and learning from one another, those are extremely helpful, especially in the Engage Forums. Yeah. So for those of you who have not used the Engage Forums, do use that. Yeah. So the topic I'm going to cover today is on how do OT cyber risks impact critical infrastructure. I'll be focusing a lot more on emerging risks that I've seen over the recent years. But before that, I'm going to share a bit more about OT-ISAC. OT-ISAC itself stands for Operational Technology, Cybersecurity Information Sharing Analysis Center. So I know it's a mouthful. Essentially, members share best practices and threat intelligence with one another. It actually arises from the second key thrust of the Singapore OT Cybersecurity Masterplan. Yeah, so the Singapore OT Cybersecurity Masterplan 1, the current version, has 4 key thrusts. So this is actually the second key thrust, which is about building the ecosystem to share knowledge and experiences with regards to OT cybersecurity. Yeah. Yeah. So later on, if any of you have any questions along the way, feel free to type into the chat window. I'm more than happy to take your questions, discuss them. If you have any thoughts, I'd love to hear and learn from your thoughts and experiences as well. Right. So the topic I intend to broach is very much on supply chain risk, right? The nth party risk and the third party risk with regards to OT, and it's a topic that is very close to my heart, and it's a risk that keeps me at night. For those of you who are not really familiar with what OT is, essentially the HVACs, the heating, ventilation, air conditioning that you get in the shopping malls, that in your homes, in your offices, they are all operational technology. Recall the Target, the US company Target breach that was through a HVAC vendor. The lifts, the escalator, the elevators, they are OT as well. So for companies that feel that they don't exactly need to be concerned with OT, do take a second look at it. Think about how you get to work, the automotives and so forth. Those are OT. The lifts in your smart buildings. If you have smart buildings, if you work in smart buildings itself, those are operational technology that can be potentially compromised and result in serious detrimental impact, right? Okay, so for nth party risk, I may not have all the answers on how to effectively de-risk nth party risk, but I thought it would really benefit all of us to discuss this topic and get the brains going in terms of thinking about the perennial topic at hand. Hopefully some of my experiences and thoughts will resonate and trigger some of your thoughts as well. And again, I would love to hear success stories from the rest of the ISACA community that everyone else can learn from as well. Yeah. Now, okay. It's intended that I didn't put a caption on this slide, and I'm not sure how many of you recall this cyber incident. Well, this is the infamous Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack, right? So it was Colonial Pipeline was a victim of a ransomware attack in May 2021. The ransomware infected and shut down the pipeline's digital systems for several days. The shutdown affected the consumers and airlines along the entire east coast of the US. And the hack was deemed a national security threat as the pipeline moves oil from refineries to industry markets. In fact, it caused the President Joe Biden to declare a state of emergency, right? Because people are worried about not getting to ferry their kids to school, not being able to ferry their kids to school, not being able to travel to their workplace simply for lack of fuel. Worried about not being able to travel to other states because airplanes may be grounded. So it was a double extortion ransomware attack. It affected the billing system in the Colonial Pipeline. You may be wondering, so what has this got to do with OT? Yeah, so Colonial Pipeline, all the oil refineries and all these oil pipelines, they are OT in nature. They have valves and so forth. So they actually shut down the pipeline for safe measure, precautionary measure, and to prevent the spread. So it is in some sense a self-inflicted denial of service attack. Yeah. And that was triggered because the billing system was compromised, and the billing system was connected to the operational technology systems. And the root cause of the attack was due to an exposed password for a VPN account. And the VPN system was supposed to have already been decommissioned. So therefore, password reuse, one of the lessons learned over here is password reuse is a common problem. And it also reflected a lack of assurance and visibility into the segmentation of OT systems. Yeah. Now at ISACA, I believe some of you might have already read this after what happened to Colonial Pipeline. The survey done 1 week after the Colonial Pipeline attack has shown that more than 21%, right? 21% say that their organizations have experienced ransomware attacks. However, fewer than 1/3 say their organizations are highly prepared for a ransomware attack. So those are very concerning statistics. Poor preparedness, right? 67% say their organizations will take new precautions in light of the Colonial Pipeline attack. 30% say critical infrastructure organizations should not pay ransom if attacked. Even though 78% say that, but in recent times, there have been reports that many companies, in fact, more than 50%, easily more than 50% would pay up the ransom, even though they are not encouraged to do so. Yeah. And 1 in 5 in their organizations do not have contingencies in place if a vendor or supplier suffers a ransomware attack. So this is a concern that I'm underscoring in this presentation. It's really about your vendors, right? You can protect yourself, but are you able to protect your vendors who you are relying on? And what happens if they suffer from a ransomware attack? So 84% say ransomware attacks will become more prevalent. This was back in 2021 and it has increasingly grown. In fact, there was a further report in the Q1 of this year that alludes to the fact whereby the first quarter of 2024 has shown a growth of ransomware attacks despite the takedowns, the law enforcement takedowns of Lockbit, ransomware gangs, and so forth. It is still unabating. It is still growing, right? It's hard to cease and desist and disrupt ransomware attackers. Now, McKinsey has provided a supply chain 4.0 compass, which shows the tight integration between the various logistics services. Supply chain 4.0 actually takes a leaf off from industry 4.0, right? So we talk about analytics, predictive analytics, preventive analytics. We talk about sensors. We talk about emerging technology like blockchain, AI, and so forth. We talk about cyber physical systems integrated together. So on the bottom right, you see all the physical flows in blue color, smart logistics, human machine interfaces. One characteristic of operational technology is most operational technologies will use human machine interfaces, right? As part of the Purdue model for the architecture of the OT environment, you have human machine interfaces sitting at layer 2 of the Purdue model, right? You have autonomous and smart vehicles. They are all OT in nature. If you look at the physical flow part, automation of warehousing, these are all relying on OT equipment, relying on OT, relying on robots, relying on automation heavily, right? And if you look at the top left, you see supply chain cloud. You see end-to-end multi-tier connectivity for collaboration. So as we integrate everything together as supply chain 4.0, we see that our attack surface, the attack surface has grown larger, right? A breach in the supply chain cloud can potentially result in a breach of the cyber physical systems on the bottom right, because they are already tightly integrated. That's the message that I want to put across for this slide. Now, we talked about earlier on about OT equipment being the risk of OT equipment being breached. We talk about vendors, briefly about vendors being breached, right? So, and we are not just talking about any other vendors. Even cybersecurity vendors, they themselves are breached, right? I mean, we have seen the impact of NotPetya Wiper through a supply chain attack on a similarly innocuous accounting software. So that's not cybersecurity vendor, right? It's not a cybersecurity, but it already caused huge damages of US 300 million for Maersk. And the downstream impact to the rest of the business supply chain was there for all to see. We've also seen for the same period of attack, Merck, which is a pharmaceutical company, how they have struggled, and finally over the after 5 years of lawsuit, fighting in the lawsuit to claw back US 1.4 billion of damages from its insurer. And that was really an exception because we know that cyber insurance is not a panacea. And we have seen IT companies like Leong, CCleaner, SolarWinds, Kaseya, Log4j, LastPass, MoveIt, and many others, etc., causing collateral damage to its customers. And of late, and that's the point of this slide, of late, even the likes of Cisco and Microsoft have been breached. The Cyber Safety Review Board, the US recently released a report alluding to the fact whereby there was a breach in Microsoft systems last year, and to date, they haven't found the root cause of how the hacker has come in. So what gives? If cybersecurity vendors, they themselves can't defend themselves from data breaches where they have direct oversight, how are we as CISOs, as security teams, as assurance professionals, as audit professionals, risk professionals expected to provide indirect oversight over third or fourth parties providing outsourced services, hardware or software to us? So that's the question I'm posting here. Right, so first let me go to the first bubble that I have. Just now I have shown you three bubbles of service, hardware and software. The first bubble, service. Is SOC 2 FIPS 140-2 as actual certifications enough to give us the kind of assurance? Right. So can third-party attestations help us? We speak of SOC 2 FIPS 140-2 vendor TPRM risk scores from posturing tools like BitSight, RiskIQ, Security Scorecard, BlueVoy, and many others, right? But companies are still getting breached. Can we say then that we have already done what is necessary? Because we have already checked their SOC 2, BitSight, BlackKite, VAPT reports at an annual basis. Is that adequate with those reports to give us the assurance? So take a look at this web page, right? On this managed service, which gives a slew of security practices. So when you look at this web page, are you assured? Reading this? Would you use this vendor? Can any of you perhaps hazard a guess who this vendor is? Well, the redacted portion of this screenshot is actually the vendor name, which I have briefly alluded to earlier, and it's none other than MoveIt. There are many vendors who have attestations and certifications that still get breached, right? So MoveIt on its website, when it sold its managed service, spoke of layers of defense, including FIPS 140-2, cryptography, access control, integrity checking, penetration testing, spoke about control of transfer activity by folder file, very granular, user single sign-on, SAML integration to IAM solutions, right? Would you trust them based on what has been stated down there? My point is that there are many vendors who have attestation and certifications that still get breached. And even when we have questionnaires and checklists, such as the Cloud Security Alliance, CCM, CSA CCM, CAIQ questionnaire, but do vendors declare exactly what is happening on the ground or interpret requirements differently from ours? In fact, in my experience, I've encountered cases where language ambiguity gives rise to differing interpretations. Also, how can checklists weed out the issues of internal misses, such as vendors out of their own operational effectiveness and convenience, creating a 2FA bypass VPN group? And I've observed that happening. Some vendors, when you outsource to a IaaS provider, out of their own convenience, to create a bypass for their own administrators, because that keeps the cost down, right? But how do we get that visibility? Can we and how do we go beyond checking that vendors are doing the correct things to checking that the vendors are doing them correct? Is it time to accept as a fact that no matter the due care, service providers will still get breached, no matter the due care that we put in place? How then do we also define due care, especially as CISOs, right? And what do we do when service providers get breached? So those are questions food for thought. Yeah. This slide reflects what you've seen in the earlier slide. That's the secure cloud you have seen, secure cloud service. So the MoveIt hack spawned over actually more than 600 breaches. In fact, it's beyond 1,000 plus since last year, mid of last year. And there's a lot of collateral damage. Millions of Americans' health data stolen after MoveIt hackers targeted IBM. because it's such a popular commoditized technical solution, the moment it gets compromised, there are cascading impact to the other vendors, second order vendors like IBM, like some of the other vendors, and even insurance companies like Aon, right? Who have questionnaires challenging and asking whether you secure your own supply chain, whether you have oversight over your own supply chain. They themselves have got indirectly hit because of the MOFID breach. So that reflects how complex the nth party supply chain risk is. Is the cloud more secure than on-premise? Is the off-premise cloud more secure than on-premise cloud? So MOFID has both on-premise and cloud-based solutions. So this is an extract of what was reported. The MOFID support team receive customer calls, and they have indicators of compromise that they have shared with their customers, both on-prem and on cloud, to check their systems to make sure that their systems that are using MOFID doesn't already have the indicators of compromise, which would have given hints of the breach itself, right? Now, Forbes also mentioned that they have seen a seismic shift in the cloud threat landscape as more threat actors target critical vulnerabilities in both cloud providers and supply chains. There is maximum return on investment, right? Focusing your attacks on a technology that is concentrated, that has concentrated use by many end users would help them leverage the maximum reward. Therefore, hybrid cloud security breaches are expected to continue to rise. They are only going to increase. And multi-cloud is now a new normal. Data residency, sovereignty requirements, you cannot possibly, especially for multinational companies, you cannot possibly have a single cloud provider across all your assets for the entire group of business units that you have, global business units that you have. For instance, China and Saudi Arabia have very tight cybersecurity restrictions, right? So that would restrict the types of cloud providers you can use, and therefore multi-cloud is inevitable. To some extent, we mitigate against concentration risk because we use different cloud providers. But on the flip side, the more cloud solutions we use, the more exposed vulnerabilities we encounter because the attack surface has also grown. So how do we manage our cyber resilience with multi-cloud? Now, I'm going to now go into the hardware and the software portion. Hardware, OT hardware. Can any one of you recognize what this is? The picture that I've shown on screen. This is actually an automated guided vehicle, or some people call it autonomous vehicles. It used to carry 40-foot long shipping containers. Some 10 years ago, I initiated and performed vulnerability assessment and penetration testing on a brand of AGVs that my organization was evaluating. And in fact, through that test, I've identified undocumented developer backdoors. What it meant was that when I sent unexpected network traffic inputs to the laser system panics, and because it panics, the safety measures of the AGV were triggered, and that causes the AGV to lock up due to its fail-safe response. And initially, the laser system vendor didn't want to resolve this issue. I was kicking the can down the road until I waved the ICS cert card and persuaded the vendor to resolve in the next firmware, or else I'm going to simply report it to ICS cert. So if there's something that I can learn from this vulnerability assessment and penetration testing, is that even off-the-shelf products, don't trust. I mean, zero trust is a term that is used widely across cybersecurity. It's not just zero trust network architecture, but also the mindset itself. We need to apply the zero trust mindset on suppliers, on the products that they've provided. We need to perform our due diligence to check the systems. Even though it's off-the-shelf product, even though we might be doing free vulnerability assessment and penetration testing service for the vendor, right? We were expecting the vendors to do the test themselves and weed out all the issues, but we ourselves have to perform those tests to give ourselves the clearance to be able to clear the systems from any vulnerabilities that you might have. So in this case, it's a backdoor, developer backdoor. How can you trust the vendor is undocumented and they didn't share it at all, right? So do we need to do this for all our vendors? Sounds very tedious, right? How many of us invest in resources for testing every one of our essentially off-the-shelf products? So that's the question I have. Damned if we don't, and damned if we do, right? We're caught between a rock and a hard place. Now, let me get into the part about the software. Security software. I mean, cybersecurity companies have not been spared, I shared earlier. Even for cybersecurity products, the products that are regularly VAPT, regularly pen tested, or claimed to be done so by the vendors, are also not spared from having issues. Above is just one of the zero-day vulnerability that are uncovered a decade ago with a reputed web security gateway company with its gateway product. Being able to uncover cybersecurity vulnerabilities with cybersecurity products that have already undergone independent VAPTs themselves only further underscores the fact that VAPT or DAST and even SAST, right, is just sampling and not foolproof. It will never be foolproof. If it has to be foolproof, we would have stopped receiving Microsoft Black Tuesday patches. So do we still have to do it? Can our due diligence withstand scrutiny if we don't? When I talk about our due diligence, it's about, can we answer to our management that we have done whatever that we can to protect our company, right? How much is enough? Again, damned if we don't and damned if we do. And to complicate things, there are also geopolitical pressures. What if our OT hardware is already widely deployed in our environment? What are we going to do about it? Not sure if any of you remember the ZPMC cranes, the China-made ZPMC cranes that were suspected to have backdoors. Right? Most shipping ports are using Chinese cranes in the likes of ZPMC. In fact, recently, the US government shared a report saying that they are concerned with these Chinese cranes. However, 80% of the cranes that are already deployed are Chinese-made cranes. So what gives? What are we going to do when a red flag suddenly comes up? And sometimes a new vulnerability becomes miscategorized as an intended backdoor because of geopolitical tensions. If all vulnerabilities are intended backdoors, then practically every hardware and software is suspicious. Right? How do we get assurance for the products? Is there a labeling schemes that goes beyond IoT to ICS OT? So in Singapore itself, we have a cybersecurity labeling scheme that was done for home IoT products. Increasingly, we are seeing the need for even OT products. It's like the health marks or safety marks that you see on food products and so forth, right? So how can end users be better assured that they are buying products that are security tested, that have minimum risk from backdoors and so forth? How can we possibly manage such risks when they are already deployed? Are we going to swap out the $1 million cranes? Are we going to swap out the $1 million operational technology equipment? I gather many of us at this stage would think of diversity of products to reduce concentration risk. But is that always possible? That means don't rely on single vendor, use multiple vendors, which means your complexity of having them integrated and interoperable becomes a challenge. Now, on the governance front, there has been no lack of guidance on the supply chain managing third-party risk, managing supply chain risk, such as the US Joe Biden presidential executive order, as well as the UK and CSC guidance, mostly on additional checks and oversights for vendor risk management. So NIST, for one, has issued special publications focused on improving third-party risk management and supply chain risk management. In fact, NIST CSF, the cybersecurity framework, has leveraged TPRM from popular frameworks such as ISO 27001 and ISACA Singapore to avoid excessive security control overlaps. These are by and large controls relating to visibility, attack surface management, independent audits, response and recovery. Are these adequate? I feel that while the outcomes are clear, the level of prescriptiveness and maturity of controls needs to be more granularly defined. We know what needs to be done, but how can we effectively achieve that? And then moving on, in the area of control effectiveness, there are many different maturity frameworks that you may have probably come across, such as CMMI, that's ISACA CMMI, C2M2, and CMMC. Most are based predominantly of NIST CSF. And I feel that they go into more prescriptive details into how processes can be repeatable and sustainable. Right. So you may be wondering, we have NIST cybersecurity framework. We have ISO 27001. Do we need a maturity framework? Has it ever come across your minds when your business units tell you they are compliant to ISO 27001, compliant to NIST, but all the issues keep popping up? And my take of all this is that the reason why all the issues keep appearing is because of the poor maturity of the organization. You may have complied to a specific control at a single point in time, and subsequently your control lapse. That's because that control hasn't been repeated. The maturity hasn't been repeatable. It has only been ad hoc, right? So it's important to go beyond cybersecurity frameworks and into cybersecurity maturity, and that's especially important for OT as well. I'll briefly touch on C2M2 vendor risk management maturity controls, as it has good OT coverage and a good great toolkit. And for the benefit of those who are new to C2M2, C2M2 has three main objectives and associated controls for vendor risk management. The first objective is identify and prioritize third-party risks. Above is that list of controls from the lowest maturity indicator level 1 or MIL1 at the bottom to the highest MIL3. And this objective requires, for instance, MIL3 prioritization of suppliers and other third parties and have the list updated based on specific conditions. So being able to maintain and sustain a constantly updated list of third-party suppliers and products and solutions. If you think about the security software bill of materials, the SBOM, and nowadays people talk about the HBOM, hardware bill of materials. Getting that list, the initial list is the straightforward part, but to maintain that list, to get new hardware analyzed and reported is typically the difficult part. And that is the kind of maturity that C2M2 is looking at. And the second objective is about managing third-party risk. Over here, I'm listing out the controls for the highest MIL, which is MIL3, and it's focused very much on the tendering process. BCM is listed here, right? Business continuity management. It speaks about having cybersecurity requirements, selection criteria, and acceptance testing of services, hardware, and software as well. So having that assurance, not just taking the vendor's word for it. It's very important, right? To have that testing, VAPT and whatsoever, to really test them. That reflects also on the maturity, needed maturity to manage third-party risk. And finally, we have the third objective of management activities, which highlights the importance of having well defined requirements for activities, having clear RASI, right? Who is responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed for performance. Vendors have trained personnel and continual monitoring and evaluation of effectiveness. Right, those are also very important. And after running through these three objectives, do you think they are adequate? So back to my earlier question of how much do you care is adequate? In my view, some of these controls are still at a very high level, and the devil is still in the final details. So let's take the third bullet point for a CSP, right? For a cloud service provider. Are we going to get the personnel to share with us an updated list of the personnel maintaining the infrastructure on a continual basis? How many of us have the list of personnel of that who are operating in our cloud service providers? How many of us are aware of the skills and the knowledge that they have or their assigned duties? So that, I think, is a challenge to be able to maintain that on a continual basis and to have their certifications map against a specific competency framework, check against their job roles. How much oversight is enough? How can we manage this effectively? If we are going to invest so much resources in having oversight on third parties, then what is the point of outsourcing in the first place? Right. People will be wondering, especially if the security function reports to the CIO or the information, that there's always that challenge between security and the resources, right? Investing in so much resources to get oversight of the parties. Yeah, but that's what the C2M2 is alluding to have that kind of maturity. So even if all these third parties will still get breached, unlike any other organization, even cybersecurity companies. So earlier on, I shared Microsoft has been breached, Cisco has been breached, right? Then what gives, right? So my view is that you can't get rid of the vendor who has monopoly. So Microsoft, for instance, they have a cyber safety review board report that alludes to the fact that they have been breached, yet they were unable to find the source of the root cause, right? Are you going to swap out from Microsoft to another vendor? I think many of us are already deeply ingrained in the use of certain vendors, right? Therefore, my take is that we need to come out with a benchmark of what the various industries are practicing and define what is acceptable and what's not. Ultimately, we don't want to negate one of the key purposes of outsourcing, which is really to defray effort and cost. Furthermore, most of the time, we can't get rid of the vendor, like I said, who has pretty much a monopoly, right? We are more often than not pretty much entrenched in many of our vendors, which have integrated and interoperated rather seamlessly in an existing digital ecosystem, which makes any switch painful and potentially operationally risky. Therefore, my view is that we have to mitigate to reasonableness and accept residual risk, and have the board understand we have done whatever that is necessary as due care. Granted, the business needs, granted that insourcing may not be feasible either. Do you agree? But what is reasonableness? That's the big question, right? Is it C2M2? Earlier on, I shared about C2M2, about having the oversight on the list of personnel, their competencies, their roles and responsibilities on a continuous basis. What is the reasonable to one may not be to another. We can say that it's based on risk, but what is the yardstick or benchmark to measure your due diligence against? So in the next few slides, I'm going to share some observed approaches that in my view exhibits due diligence towards acceptable residual risk in most industries. And I would love to hear your thoughts after this presentation. First and foremost, I think it is important to convince the board that we are adopting sound practices, sound approaches beyond frameworks. One of the approaches I like is the irony is that it's from Microsoft. It's Microsoft's SD3 or SD3. Microsoft SD3 has been around for easily at least 20 years. CISA has been harping mostly on design recently. More recently on, and even more recently on the security by default settings. They have been talking about security by design for at least 3 to 5 years, and more recently on security by default settings, having the buck stop at the OEMs, at the vendors. SD3 is generally useful for supply chain risk across service, hardware, and software. But increasingly, deployment is also getting into the radar because continuous secure deployment of changes and updates and architecting correctly in the whole scheme of things is so important. Unfortunately, we all know that insecurity by design that comes with most legacy OT products. Most OT products are built not to be connected in the fashion that Industry 4.0, Supply Chain 4.0, recall this McKinsey this I shared earlier, required. In the past, OT equipment, machinery just operate standalone. They are not connected to IT. It's not like Colonial Pipeline connect to the billing system. They don't connect to sensors, internet sensors, where you can then monitor the sensors across the internet. You don't have smart meters in the past. Now you have smart meters. So insecurity by design was a characteristic of most legacy OT products in the past, and even to date. And usually people don't swap out of their OT equipment. They'll use it for 10, 20, 30 years. You look at war machines, submarines, all this. What is their lifetime? Some of them are still using floppy drives and floppy disk. So to manage that, the security by design concept in the OT environment cannot be component-based, but ecosystem and network-based. Right, and this is where zero trust comes into focus. I'll share more about this later. Now, this slide focuses primarily on hardware and software risks. We are mostly speaking of defense in depth, with diverse people, process, and technological solutions and breadth in terms of layers of similar protection to disrupt lateral movement across the cyber Q chain, for instance. However, less spoken about is defense in diversity. To avoid concentration risks, especially in geopolitical tensions, I spoke earlier about. I think it's important we diversify products. In the example of cranes, do not use a single crane product. Use multiple different ones, multiple different types of products. Of course, there is risk when so many products are used. As I shared earlier, alluded to earlier, one is interoperability. Second is the multiplier effect, the number of vulnerabilities you have to manage. How do you orchestrate all the configuration settings and fixes to a diverse set of products? Having said that, it is necessary to de-risk concentration risk, especially in the OT environment. Now, the question is, do we review the vendor's architecture even for SaaS? At least for the SaaS provider should show proof that they reviewed their IAS upstream, right? I mean, when you assess your cloud service providers, if it's a SaaS provider, do you actually go through the whole 9 yards of security standards and clauses, even the infrastructure controls, to check them against? I think minimally, we have to get the SaaS provider to show proof that they have reviewed their IaaS upstream, because they rely on certain infrastructure, right? That the infrastructure that they rely on, that is where the nth party comes in, also has the right security controls in place. I mean, it has been reported in the news in the past that some of the SaaS providers, they were compromised not because of their application, but because of the infrastructure that they reside on. Some of the endpoints that were used to manage their infrastructure were compromised. So in your review of your vendor, do you actually go to the extent of checking whether the IaaS that the SaaS provider sits on is managed through secure jump hosts, through PIM-PAM, PSM solutions, right? So we need them to show proof that they have their house in order. Having said that, if we are using a specific collaboration platform such as Microsoft O365 or Google Workspace or Google Collaboration Platform, it is hard to diversify without getting into integration issues. Right? So I gather there are some we can diversify, such as in the types of OT equipment, and in some areas we can't. Finally, beyond SD3 and defense in depth, we have zero trust, which I alluded to earlier. So zero trust as a mindset and approach is important, especially in an OT environment, which has insecure by design components. Again, it doesn't need to be the extreme of a ZTNA zero trust network architecture put in place right from the start with AO2.1x, aware switches, with software-defined networking implemented into OT equipment. In fact, sometimes we just need to shield a HMI, human machine interface, or PLC, right, at a Purdue level 1 level that we cannot patch. We simply shield it with a secure jump host. Protecting the east-west traffic and limiting attack blast radius would be as simple as turning on the Microsoft Defender, because most of the HMIs are Windows. Yes, there are Linux variants as well. But what I'm trying to say is that you can just turn on the host-based firewalls. It's not foolproof, but enough to mitigate most attacks, because most of the attacks, including ransomware attacks, are moving laterally through loft beans, living off the land attacks. And what are they using? They're using Microsoft utilities like PowerShell, PSSX, WMIC cores, Windows Management Instrumentation Interface cores that goes through TCP/445, which is SMB, right? So if two Windows machines have no business communicating with one another, simply block off those kind of traffic. That will limit the blast radius and attack surface. So in terms of service providers, we should also really limit the blast radius, extending that to third parties, and be able to draw bridge and continue business operations. So if a third party gets breached, do you have the playbook in place, incident response playbook in place to cut them off and yet sustain your business operations? So one point about zero trust is that assumed breach is oftentimes a neglected yet important component. We must assume that our OT network cannot be trusted and consume actionable threat intelligence. Subscribe to cyber threat intelligence, ISACs. So I myself, I chair the OT-ISAC. That is where threat intelligence is shared. To IOCs and TTBs are shared to be able to threat hunt, have adequate incident response if possible, with SOAR, orchestration, and deploy updated countermeasures such as the UDA, the picture you see on the right, the SANS UDA model, observe, orientate, decide, and act cycle of active cyber defense. Right? Because ultimately the aim is to detect fast, contain fast, recover fast. So while it's easy to validate for on-prem environments of our own hardware and software, how do we apply this to vendor environments? In fact, I've learned many times from vendors who got compromised, assuring us that the impact is minimal because they adopted zero trust and limited the blast radius as a result. So I thought that is positive. If you are looking out for vendors, it's good to look for vendors who really internalize that zero trust mindset, because it gives us greater confidence that they will be able to get they will be able to keep breaches under control, right? And will limit the breach so that it doesn't spread into your environment and you will not suffer that collateral damage, like what happened to Move It, like what happened in NotPetya, the MeDocs software, accounting software that got compromised that was based off Ukraine. We can all agree that all companies can be breached, but if third parties limit their exposure through zero trust, that is definitely most assuring. And beyond that, like I said, we need to be able to draw a breach in an effective manner. We need to practice our incident response tabletop exercise. We need to practice how the parties, when they get breached, we are able to activate contingencies. And therefore, my take is that we need zero trust to limit the blast radius, especially with regards to that ecosystem of suppliers. What's my point with this slide? US Air Force may have shot down hobby clubs balloon worth $12 with a $439,000 missile. So it's important to have accurate threat intelligence feeds. If you have false positives, you end up chasing the wrong tail, right? Chasing after the wrong thing, and you waste resources, whereas you lose sight of what is critical. So having the right threat intelligence is important so that you can prioritize your actions in terms of zero trust, in terms of assume breach, in terms of what to focus on to be able to detect fast, contain fast, and recover fast. Summing all up, I think first and foremost, really very important to educate the board and the senior management that we can't avoid vendor breaches. We have to appreciate the limitations as even with posturing tools as part of risk. Right. Aligning these expectations is key. We can't possibly have the cake and eat it. At the end of the day, we can't avoid vendor breaches. We need to appreciate the limitations, even with posturing tools as part of risk. We can, however, mitigate to reasonableness, accept residual risks. Otherwise, if we can't fulfill the original objective of outsourcing, we may be better off insourcing or self-developing the solutions ourselves. The big question is what defines reasonableness and what defines a CISO's due care. We require a best practice benchmark to use as a basis to determine when enough is enough for TPRM, third-party risk management, and SCRM, supply chain risk management, in terms of how much oversight into whether vendors are doing the right things right. They can tell you they are doing the right things, but are they doing it correctly, right? So my wishful thinking is that if there is a mechanism to continually have real-time oversight of third-party compliance, not just the higher-level ones as what the many posturing tools like beside BlueVoyant, RiskIQ, Security Scorecard does, yet is trusted by the vendors, would be most ideal. I'm still looking out for that kind of solution that has in-depth oversight. Until then, my take is that we just have to, for lack of better word, suck it up and mitigate, yet not overdo, to the right due care by adopting reputed control and maturity frameworks, C2M2 and so forth. Adopt sound practices like SD3 and defense in depth, zero trust, and assume breach. I'm not sure whether you agree with me, but that's my last slide. I hope I've done justice to that span of time. I've shared my presentation to get at least get some of you pondering and thinking about the conundrums with third party, with outsourcing. I hope to hear your views and questions in the next, I think we have 5 to 10 minutes or so. I hope that we can all have really more research into TPRM and SCRM best practices. Again, I may not have all the answers, and but having questions will help at least avoid some of the potential blind spots for everyone. Yeah, thank you. Over to you. Right.
There's one question from the audience. What are the main challenges for adopting AI in this space of critical infrastructure?
Yeah. So That's a good question, and I think AI has been a perennial topic. So AI, I would see as double-edged sword. We have to secure such emerging AI, right? Secure the solutions that are relying on AI. We also need to secure against adversarial AI. So in terms of adopting AI, OWASP has came up with the top 10 for large language models, and that talks about data poisoning, prompt injection attacks, LM model compromise attacks, and so forth. So those are some of the key challenges when you set up the large language models. Whether you use the cloud one or you use an on-prem one because you are concerned with data sensitivity. Of course, data sensitivity definitely will be the first and foremost that comes into your mind, whether you are sharing too much, right? And of course, hallucination risks with use of AI, right? So securing how AI is being used is very important because hackers can attack the LLMs, can attack the API calls because the large language models are using API or calls to connect with each other to be able to perform the data training. Having said that, there is also important to perform steps to protect against adversarial AI attacks. So what that means is that in your vulnerability assessment and penetration, in fact, even in your red teaming exercises, you need to start thinking about how do you want to red team the LLMs. Red team the LLMs to test out the blue teams, to test across people, process, and technologies. Yeah, and the other side of the coin is how about using AI for cybersecurity? There's a lot of hype with AI right now. Almost every vendor will say, I have AI. AI actually is not new, but generative AI is, right? Generative AI itself can give rise to hallucination. So you have some of the examples of more renowned products like Microsoft Security Copilot. It's Copilot for Security. Now it's called Copilot for Security. It's about what it does. It will help you summarize incidents, right? What it has claimed is to be able to do in machine speed. So if you have a level 1, if you have a security operations center, you have a level 1 analyst performing analysis of the events, security events, the logs, trying to ascertain an IOC, what is it in your system, whether the tactics, techniques, and procedures, the behaviors are inside the environment. It takes a longer period of time. Whereas the solutions like Microsoft Copilot for Security will help speed up this process, level 1 process, right? Having said that, you have to do it cautiously. There's a reason why Microsoft called it a Copilot. They never call it an autopilot because generative AI cannot replace the human. Generative AI only helps to augment your work. So therefore, it is important to also validate the output from these generative AI engines to cross-check because there can be hallucinated facts over there. There may be certain confidence that if you go down the wrong rabbit hole, you may have an issue. If let's say it tells you that the root cause is a specific, the patient 0 is at a specific IP address, and it's not, you'll be detecting wrongly, containing wrongly, while the attacker is still ongoing somewhere else. So I hope that answers your question. Main challenge, I think, is really about being able to ascertain the hype from the hope itself. Because many vendors, they're coming to you to say that I have AI, I have generative AI. So you must be able to perform the POC, the proof of concept, against them. Critical infrastructure, of course, I mean, the thing about critical infrastructure is that we want things to be safe. So generative AI is creative. I give you an example. In a shipping port, we have specific algorithms to place containers in the yard, containers on the ships. Specific algorithms, control. Are we going to get generative AI to creatively think of how to move the cranes around? That adds risk to us, right? I mean, we cannot have a crane suddenly think that, hey, I want to do something different from the norm, because that can create safety issues. So there are places to apply generative AI. There are places where other forms of AI, like machine learning, like supervised machine learning, is more suited for. So critical information infrastructure, in my view, supervised machine learning is safe to use, but generative AI, you need to be cautious about it and be able to have it explainable. If you can't explain it, if it goes into certain actions that are out of the norm, that has impact to safety and availability. Because ultimately, for critical infrastructure, safety and availability is the topmost concern. Yeah. So I hope that answers your question.
Naranjan, over to you.
I think his session hung.
Yes, it's now 7:32.
I mean, if there are questions, I'm happy to take it up. My LinkedIn is on screen just now. So feel free to add me. I love to connect with you. Yeah, ultimately it's about learning from one another. If you have questions, feel free to ping me on LinkedIn as well. Thank you.
All right then. Let's end the session. On behalf of ISACA Sri Lankan Chapter, would like to thank Stephen Sim Konglong for accepting the invitation to do a session for our members. It was very informative and interesting session. Thank you all of you for joining us for today's webinar. Have a pleasant evening.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Yeah. Happy holidays.
Thank you. Happy holidays.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.